Oh, good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all this evening. We want to welcome our visitors here. I'm very happy to have you here with us. We ask that you let us take a moment and get to know you a little bit better after the service. This evening we'll be in John chapter 11. John chapter 11. Starting this evening and over the next couple weeks, we're going to go through a series of lessons looking at this passage, and we're going to go through the passage in sections, and we're going to ask really the question, what does it mean to have a relationship with Christ? And very specifically, we're going to focus on our relationship to Christ. We understand we have a relationship with the Father, and we have a relationship with the Spirit, and I want to look at this passage to understand our relationship to Jesus and what that means, what that entails, and what we can expect from it. Because to have a relationship with someone is to have your life really intertwined with someone in a way that just can't be separated all that much. You know, we have family, and even family that we may not talk to, our life is still wrapped up in many ways in their life. One of the interesting things about relationships is they really never end, they just kind of change. A relationship doesn't end. Once you meet someone and you have a relationship with them, even if you never see them again, even if they die, even if they're divorced, you still have a relationship with them. It changes. So relationships are very interesting in that respect. And we have a relationship to Christ. In fact, really everyone does have a relationship to Christ. Some relationships, though, are a little better than others. And I want us to focus at this time on Jesus himself. What does it mean to say we have a relationship with the Son of God? What do we expect from that? And we're going to be looking at this account of Jesus' resurrection of Lazarus. This evening, we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 27 of John chapter 11. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll get further and further into this account. But this evening, we're going to be looking at John chapter 11, verses 1 through 27, and we are going to focus on our relationship specifically to what I'm going to call the identity of Christ. And by identity, I mean in part who he claims to be. And I also mean in part concerning his identity, his personality. What is he like? What does it mean to interact with him? What can we expect from this? So we're going to read this, John chapter 11, verses 1 through 27. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." It's a very interesting account of Jesus and Lazarus. There's a lot going on here. It's very information rich. But our focus is on what is it like to have a relationship to Christ? What does it mean? What do we learn about him in his claims about himself as well as his personality? And one of the first things we learn straight off the bat is that Jesus is the kind of person who will come to you when you call to him. And it's really important to understand that. To actually believe that when you approach Jesus, he will respond. There's no getting around that. That when you come to him, he won't put it off. He won't delay indefinitely is what I mean. But he will respond. And whether or not we believe God will respond to us when we actually come to him or talk to him says a lot about what we think of God. And Jesus is the kind of person who will respond. So you have Mary and Martha sending this message to Jesus in verse 3. So the sisters sent to him saying, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." I want you to notice this message. "Lord, he whom you love is ill." That's it. That's the message. It's non-specific. It's very brief. And there's a lot of unspoken things going on here, such as, "Please come and heal him." And I want you to realize that Jesus doesn't respond to just the words. He responds to the entire context, even all the unspoken stuff. So Jesus is not going to be like a genie where you've got to say the exact words in the exact right way, otherwise he's going to find a loophole. Jesus knows what we need. And he's going to respond appropriately, even if we can't always find the right words. Even if we say things that aren't as specific as we would like them to be. He's not looking for loopholes. He wants to help us. And when we call to him, he will respond. But the thing about Jesus that we also learn here is that he will respond at his time and in his way. So we can't force it. Because the way God views time is very different than us. And we have to be prepared for us working on God's time, not God working on ours. So first thing is, when you call to Jesus, he will actually respond. And it says a lot about us and how we think of God if we actually believe that or if we don't. If we think we're just throwing words out there and sometimes they're heard and sometimes they're not, it says a lot about how we think of God. But what we see is Jesus will respond. But he will do so in his time and in his way. Now, Jesus, another important thing to know about him is not only will he respond, but he will do something. He will actually act in your life. He will actually engage you and change you and ask you to do things that are sometimes uncomfortable. Jesus, you'll notice, did not only arrive and respond to these women's request, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." He actually did something about it. And sometimes it's hard for us because sometimes when we're in difficult situations, we just want someone to listen to us. We don't want someone to actually do something and to start fixing our problems. But that's not all of who Jesus is. He will listen, but he will actually do something. He will actually engage us. And to come to Jesus is not a light thing to do. You need to be prepared for your life to be changed in irreversible ways. I mean, we know how this ends, if you're familiar with this. In John chapter 11, we know Lazarus is raised from the dead. Could you imagine being someone who sees this and then trying to sleep that night? Like, how could you sleep? You just saw someone rise from the dead. How can you unsee this as you go throughout your life? To come to Christ is not only to have him respond, but to have him interact in our lives and to have him interact in ways that are irreversible, ways that cannot be undone, ways that change a person so dramatically that you have people like Stephen who are willing to go to their deaths in the name of Christ because they were so changed, so transformed. And this is one of the reasons why Jesus spoke to people, telling them to count the cost before they came to him. It's not a light thing to come to Christ. Being a Christian is not something we culturally or with our family inherit. It's something we choose to do, and we have to bear the choice of having our lives changed irreversibly. That's a part of what it means to come to Christ. That is a part of who he is, who he has demonstrated himself to be here in the Gospels. He changes people. He interacts with them. He responds when people call to him. So, first thing to know about Jesus, about what it means to have a relationship with him, is he's actually going to respond when you call to him. And he's actually going to interact in your life in irreversible ways. And that is something to, in many ways, be prepared for. Second thing we learn about Jesus here is that he will ask difficult things of us, but it's nothing he won't do himself. He will ask difficult things of us, but nothing he will do himself. He's going to ask us to go to difficult places. And sometimes that's geographically a real difficult place. That's exactly what we see here in this passage. You understand that Jesus, by going to Lazarus, where Lazarus lived, risked his life. So you have in verses 7 and 8, then after this he said to the disciples, let's go to Judea again. And the disciples say to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. Are you going there again? Jesus risked his life to go and raise Lazarus from the dead. And the disciples, when they go along with him, you see in verse 16 that Thomas resigns himself to death. He says, let us also go that we may die with him. To come to Jesus is to sometimes be asked to go to difficult places. And that may mean a difficult geographical location where our lives are at risk. But it's nothing that Jesus isn't willing to do himself. But Jesus doesn't just ask us to go to difficult geographical locations. Sometimes he asks us to go to difficult states of mind. Sometimes the difficult place he asks us to go to is a difficult place that's hard to go to because it's mentally hard to go to. So, for example, in this passage here, you have Jesus on purpose waiting for Lazarus to die. You see this here in this passage in verses 6 and 7. We read, so when Jesus heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Jesus receives notification, Lord, he whom you love is ill. And his response is, I'm going to wait 2 days so that Lazarus dies, and then I'm going to go there. Jesus, on purpose, waited for Lazarus to die. He, on purpose, put Mary and Martha through something very difficult to go through, the death of a sibling. To come to Christ is to be asked to go to difficult places. And sometimes it's difficult geographical locations, and sometimes it's difficult mental places. To be taken through something that's very stressful, something that's traumatic, something that just keeps us up at night. But this is nothing that Jesus is unwilling to do himself. Because as we see later, this is one of the passages where we have Jesus weeping. Jesus himself went to this difficult mental state along with the sisters. He didn't have them go through it alone. Christ will ask difficult things of us. And sometimes that means going to difficult places, geographical locations, or difficult states of mind. Or sometimes it's being asked to believe things that are difficult to believe. As I said, Jesus waited on purpose for Lazarus to die. If you were Mary or Martha and you learned that, because they know this. I don't think it's any secret that Jesus waited, because you have Martha in verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She's saying, you should have been here. You weren't that far away. They knew where he was. They sent him a message. Jesus sometimes asks us to do difficult things. And if you were Mary or Martha, could you actually believe that there was a good reason why Jesus waited for your brother to die? That's hard. That's a hard thing to believe at times. It's a hard thing to go through. Christ asks us to go through difficult things. And that's something to be prepared for in having a relationship to Jesus. That's not something to be taken lightly. It is counting the cost of discipleship, understanding that Jesus will ask us to go to difficult places at times, difficult geographical locations, difficult states of mind. Jesus will ask us to believe things that can be hard to believe. Do you believe that there was a good reason why your brother Lazarus died? These are difficult things. And it's something to be prepared for in having a relationship with Jesus. That Jesus will often ask us to believe more than what we currently believe. As I said, Jesus interacts with us. God changes us, transforms us, helps us to grow and to mature. And maturing often means going through great difficulties, great trials. And to believe things more than we currently believe, deeper than what we currently believe. I mean, consider what we have here, for example. You have these sisters believing that Jesus could have healed Lazarus. So in verse 21, Martha says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God would give you. Or in verse 32, Mary says the same thing. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. They believe Jesus can heal Lazarus while he's alive. But it doesn't occur to them that Jesus can raise the dead. They believe Jesus maybe has the power of a prophet, verses 21 and 22. When Martha says this, she says, verse 22, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. She's in many ways treating Jesus as if he's a prophet. But he's not just a prophet. He's something much more than that. Jesus will often take us beyond what we're comfortable with and then ask the question, do you still trust me? To come to Christ is to sometimes believe things that are hard to believe, that go beyond where we currently are. I mean, this is still a lot of faith, I think, to believe that Jesus has the power of healing. That's remarkable that she believes this. But Jesus is going to push her a little bit farther. Not only does Christ have the power of healing, he can raise the dead. To come to Christ, to have a relationship to Christ, means that Christ will interact in our lives. And as I've been saying, it's something we have to be prepared for. And I think one of the things this passage does is it prepares us for this very well. Lastly, to come to Christ, to have a relationship to Christ in his identity, as we're focusing on this evening, who he claims to be and what some of his personality traits are, means that you will see firsthand that the power of God is more than just theoretical. You will see firsthand that the power of God is more than just theoretical. Consider this passage here in verses 23 and 24. Jesus says to Martha, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha responds with, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." This to me is very similar to when you're talking to someone about God, about Christ, about the words of Christ, and they say something like, "Well, he just meant that spiritually," which to me is just a way of writing off the saying or the words as true. Jesus says, verse 23, "Your brother will rise again." And she says, "Yeah, I know. In the resurrection on the last day, as I've been taught, my brother will rise again." Because by this time, the Jews had in many ways figured out, and you can see this like back in Daniel, for example, that when the kingdom of God comes, you will have the resurrection of the dead. They put these things together. So she understands, yes, in the last day, in the resurrection of the dead, my brother will rise again. Which is to say, it's sometime in the future. And if it happens, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But Jesus, in verse 25, he very easily could have started this sentence with, "You don't understand. You don't understand. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. There is no such thing as a resurrection apart from Christ. He is the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" I mean, verse 26, you ask many people today, even many Christians, do you believe this? And I think it'd be hard to find some people who really believe this. Everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. What does that mean? Does it mean something? Or did Jesus just mean this spiritually? I mean, it means something. See, to come to Christ is to see God is more than just theoretical. You can look to the world around you and see God in action if you look at the world in the right way. And if you look at Christ, you can see the power of God firsthand. And this is something Jesus is desperately trying to get across to Martha. You don't understand. I am the resurrection. Because Jesus isn't just a prophet. She's treating Jesus as if he's a prophet, as if he just has these good moral teachings, as if he just has these words he's bringing from God and nothing more. But that's not who Jesus is. Jesus is not a human being elevated. He is deity humbled. You see the difference? He's not a human being elevated. He's deity humbled. And all too often, people treat Jesus as if he's a superhuman rather than God humbled and in the flesh. Jesus says, I am the resurrection, right? Jesus, he's not from here. I mean, technically speaking, Jesus isn't even from this planet. He came from somewhere else. He's God in the flesh. He is the resurrection. He is life. His teachings have real power. How he understood the world is the best way anyone could ever understand the world. How he understands what it means to be human is better than anyone else has ever understood what it means to be human. No one has come even close to Jesus. Jesus is life. He is the resurrection. There is no such thing as a resurrection apart from him. It is a quality of his, of who he is. He is the life. He is the resurrection. Death has no power over him because he is life. Death kind of steamrolls over us. Because life is a part of us, but it's not us. It's not like within us. We don't produce our own life. But it's not that way with God. He is life. Life and death can't steamroll over God any more than a steamroller can steamroll over itself. He is life. He is the resurrection. And to come to Christ is to see firsthand that the power of God is more than just theoretical. You have prayers that will actually be answered. Very specific prayers that will be answered in ways that you cannot explain other than God listened to you and did it. That's what it is to come to Christ. He's not theory. He's real. And he actually lives even today. We are, as Christians, in a relationship with the one who has power over life and death. It's in his control. It's in his hands. He is the resurrection and the life. This evening and the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about what it means to have a relationship with Jesus. Because I want us to understand it a little more deeply than this is just someone who died for my sins. It's true, he did. But this is also someone who's deeply interested in who you are, what you're doing now, where you're going, and how you're going to get there. This is someone who's interested in not just who you are, who you're going to be 5 years from now, but who you're going to be, 5 million years from now. Who are you eternally? To be in a relationship with Christ is to be in a relationship with someone who will interact with you, who will answer your prayers, who will listen to you and come to you when you call to him, and someone who has your ultimate best interest always in mind. To be in a relationship with Christ is to be in a relationship with life itself. And when we really understand this, we'll never be the same because Christ changes us irreversibly. At this time, I offer you an invitation to consider just who Jesus is and just what he intends to do in your life. Because Jesus didn't just come to teach good ethics. Jesus did not just come to make you someone who can die and go to heaven. Jesus came here to raise the dead. Not just Lazarus, but people who are living in sin and death right now. He came to change us. He came to transform us so that we would have a relationship with life itself. If there's anything at all that we can do for you, if you need to be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins into Christ, we can do that. If you need prayers or help, please talk to us. If you would like to know more about God, that is what the church does. The church teaches people about God. We can pray for you. We can teach you. We can answer your questions. If there's anything that you need, we ask that you would talk to us or even come forward now as we'll stand and sing the song of invitation.